Hi, everyone. Afternoon. So thanks so much, everybody, and welcome to our fourth Distinguished International Scholar event, where we're honouring the exceptional contributions of Professor Jean Bartunek, renowned for her groundbreaking work in organisational change and collaboration between practitioners and researchers. And I know Jean can probably see some of her collaborators there in the background. So her research has profoundly influenced how we understand the intersections of theory and practice, making her a very fitting honoree for this award this year. Before we proceed, I just want to name check and mention a few IAM activities that we have happening in the next few months or in the coming weeks. So I'm delighted that the IAM 2025 conference, which is taking place in Maynooth University, the call for papers is out. So this conference is taking place on the 26th and 27th of August, with the doctoral colloquium taking place on the 25th of August. And this year's theme is crafting a new future for management, learning from existing paradigms. So we are inviting submissions that challenge traditional boundaries and propose innovative approaches to management research. So take a look at our IAM website. I'm going to share some links on the chat later on, and please do submit papers for the doctoral colloquium or for the conference itself. Just to remind you that our BAM IAM Collaborative Research Grant Scheme is open as well. So the closing date for applications is Thursday, the 20th of March, 2025. And this is our collaboration with the British Academy of Management. This is our third year now, and it's designed to support and advance international research collaborations between management scholars in the Republic of Ireland and the UK, and it's aimed at early career researchers. So as I said, I'll share the link in the chat later as well, and if you're interested, please get in touch. And then finally, our 2025 Festival of Education. Again, this is in conjunction with British Academy of Management and our sister academy institutions in Italy and Spain. And again, this is an excellent opportunity to connect with global scholars and educators in management. So stay connected with us on LinkedIn, check our websites for updates for other initiatives, and look forward to seeing you at some of our events. Before we get cracking, I just want to say a huge thanks to Mike Morley from the University of Limerick for kindly agreeing to facilitate today's event. I know he's put a lot of work in to prepare, and he knows Jean's work anyway, but he did admit that he's probably read a few things today just in case he's asking a particular tricky question. And I know he's a friend of Jean's and was eager to be involved today. So huge thanks to Mike. And just before we kick off, I just want to give a very brief background to Jean and her work, and it will obviously not do justice to the huge amount of work that she's done, but as a background, Professor Jean Bartunek is a distinguished scholar whose work has profoundly shaped the fields of organisational change, collaboration and the scholar-practitioner interface. She's a Professor of Management and Organisation, Robert A. and Evelyn J. Ferris Chair at Boston College. She's published extensively in top-tier journals, including the Academy of Management Learning and Education, Academy of Management Review, Academy of Management Perspectives, Journal of Management in areas such as change, academic practitioner relationships, management, research impact, and broadly within teaching and learning. Her research is celebrated for bridging technical rigor, practical relevance, and offering deep insights into how organizations evolve and adapt in complex environments. In recognition of her outstanding contributions to management research, Jean has received numerous accolades, so we're not the first in a long list, including the Academy of Management's Career Achievement Award for Distinguished Scholarly Contributions to Management, and most recently a Distinguished Scholar Award in Organisation Development and Change Division for the Academy of Management in 2023, and the Managerial Practice Award from Academy of Management Review. Jean is also a past president of the Academy of Management and a fellow of the Academy, further demonstrating her leadership and influence in the management field. Professor Bartunek's contributions to management scholarship and teaching are multifaceted. Her seminal work on second-order change has advanced understanding of organisations. Moreover, her focus on the dynamic interplay between researchers and practitioners within the broad field of management research has highlighted the need for co-creation and knowledge translation, and this commitment to fostering dialogue reflects her dedication to making research both actionable and impactful. So in all this makes her a hugely deserving recipient for the Irish Academy of Management Distinguished International Award, and I'm hugely delighted that she has agreed to accept this award from the Irish Academy of Management, and hopefully we will hopefully meet in person to give you that award, at least at the start to participate in today's event. So huge thanks and congratulations, Jean, and I'll hand you over to Mike now.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Margaret. I've been, ever since Mike contacted me, I've been really excited, and I'm very grateful to you all. I've had the good luck to be in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, a few times, and I've loved it there. And I know some of, even though Bartunek is not an Irish name, so on my mom's side there are several Irish ancestors, so I feel very connected. And I've loved the time I've had a chance to be there, and it means a whole lot to me to get this award. So thank you.
Thanks, Jean.
Thanks so much, Margaret, and thanks again so much, Jean, for joining us today. As you mentioned, Jean, we know that you're no stranger to this part of the world, and it's fantastic to have the opportunity on behalf of the Academy to engage with you today on your many different scholarly contributions. You joined us, we were recollecting earlier, you joined us in 2010 as a keynote speaker when we hosted the Academy in Cork at Munster Technological University, what was then Cork Institute of Technology. And you subsequently joined us, if I remember, in 2012 for the IFSAM Congress that we hosted here in Limerick in 2012. So the Irish Academy of Management, as you know, is a smaller academy, Jean, but it's a very vibrant academy. And
absolutely.
And many colleagues and friends have turned out today, and I can see collaborators of yours in the audience. Many have turned out today to be with you, Jean, and to listen to the conversation and to support you in this endeavour. Jean, I wanted to do this in four movements, if I could, right? I wanted to take a step back in the first instance before we talk about substantive aspects of your work. I also wanted to talk a little bit about your leadership in the Academy and various leadership and mentoring roles that you've held. And then I also want to talk a little bit about where we're at right now, a little bit of reflection, and perhaps one or two things about in prospect into the future. But let me start, Jean, if it's okay with you. Let me start a little bit with your background, and perhaps you might tell us a little bit about your early academic journey and your kind of motivation, what inspired you to join the OD and the organization studies field.
First of all, I'll talk about part of it now. I know you had mentioned some other questions later. So the part of it now is I majored in psychology and sociology in college at Maryville College, what was Maryville College in St. Louis, which was run by my religious order, the Society of the Sacred Heart. And then eventually I got a job teaching at a school out. I knew I was going to go to graduate school sometime. I got a job teaching at a school outside the Chicago area. And they had my first full year there, they had some consultants come in, some organization development consultants, whatever this was, who were going to help our faculty work together better. And to say that it was a catastrophe is to be much too positive about it. But they supported all kinds of awful, abusive behavior in the name of being open to things. By the time we kicked them out, a decision we should not have made, since I was a lowly teacher, all of us, the head of the school down to everybody, decided all this participation in decision-making stuff was unbelievably stupid. We didn't want anything to do with it. We didn't want anything to do with organizational change, people. And that is what made me think, this stuff is really powerful, but there's got to be a way to do it better. I won't go into all the gory details now. You all don't need to know that.
Yeah. And Jean, thinking additionally about your background, both as a scholar, but also as a member of a religious organization, to what extent would you say, that has shaped your perspective and shaped the kind of interest that you have as a scholar?
Great. Well, that fills out the opening question a little bit. So I should say the first day I was in kindergarten, I decided to be a teacher. And the first day I was in first grade, I decided to be a Catholic nun. So basically all my career was settled by the time I was about 6 years old, with a few interruptions. So then as I mentioned, I went to college. Then I joined my religious order in the Society of the Sacred Heart. And I mean, the answer to that, the full answer to that question requires my going a little bit beyond where I left off, but I'll do that very quickly.
Sure.
Because I think it's worth it. So, um, so the grad, I ended up, because I was already living in the Chicago area, I had known from the beginning that I was going to get a doctorate. I ended up going to the University of Illinois in Chicago in the psychology department. I didn't think I was that smart, but so I didn't apply to places like Northwestern. But I got into there, and they were just starting a program where you had to be in one scholarly area, and I chose social psych, and you had to be in one applied area, either teaching, clinical, or organizational. And I ended up in organizational because of these catastrophic experiences I'd had. Not I had, everybody in our school had. And then after I finished, behavior group at the University of Illinois downstate. I never walked into a management school before. I never even walked into the doors, but there are old stories about religious that you often end up doing things that you have no idea what you're doing. And while I was there, I had a religious realization that I won't go into all the details with, but what it became clear to me that year was that what I wanted to do, both my career and my life, had to do with putting together how people think about things and how they act, and that had a lot of meaning for me. And organization development at its best was an example of that at the time, because at that time, not the idiot consultants who'd come to the school where I was teaching, but there were a lot of solid academics who were also doing organization development. So, so that actually felt like it put together a lot. So again, I could go into much more detail, but I think that's enough to be clear. I hope so, at any rate.
Jean, I'll move, if it's okay with you, Jean, to a couple of the substantive parts of your work, because importantly, I think I wanted to touch on those today, and it really is only a fraction of the many different contributions that you have made. But I know that one of the most significant areas is, of course, around organizational change and development, and in particular, the cognitive aspect and that early framework on first order and second and third order change. And I wanted to ask you, Jean, how that came about, what inspired that framework, and the kind of contributions that it has subsequently led to.
Sure, I'll tell you. So in my doctoral program, under the guidance of my advisor, I had studied some organization development interventions taking place in the Archdiocese of Chicago school system. Mm-hmm. And we had done the standard things. They tried this participation intervention. How well did it work? That was the standard thing at the time. And then for I got my religious order was undergoing changes, was happening to a lot of religious orders in the 1970s, 1960s and 70s. And I happened across a filing cabinet that had a whole bunch of minutes of meetings of the group that ended up planning this. And I discovered that I had access to all kinds of archival materials. And I decided, well, gee, this is an interesting change thing. I might as well see what's going on. Although it's nothing like they planned to do this and then it happened. It was more like people fought for about 10 years about what kind of change had happened, and then suddenly it happened. And at one point I was visiting my brother Tom in was then living in Washington, D.C., and it occurred to me that what was happening was a dielectric process, even though I didn't know much about what those were. So then I decided to treat it as a dielectric process, and which is different from the way organizational change was being studied. It was there, this is your planned change, this is what you're going to get. Mm-hmm. And then that actually ended up being helpful. I based it partly on some work that I learned about, although I never studied any of this macro stuff in graduate school. I based it in part on some work that Royston Greenwood and Bob Heinings had been doing that was more sociological and structural. So I read that to understand sort of what I was talking about. So that's how that idea came about at first. It was just like, oh, gee, this isn't like the kind of change I'm used to. I guess there are more ways of changing than just one where you decide to plan a power equalization study and then you do it. And then Mike Mock, who had been a very good friend of mine, who said my only training in my doctoral program had been in experimental social psychology. That was the only research I learned how to do. But I'd met him at the University of Illinois. He was a great friend who got me involved in studying quality of work-life intervention at a food processing company in the southern U.S. So I learned a lot from him about how to do qualitative research, and he was the one who came up with a lot of organization development interventions too can be seen in that way. So let me just. I hope what I'm saying sort of makes sense. But one of the things it draws attention to is that if you're studying change, it doesn't make that much sense just to say this was the original plan and this was the outcome. Did you do it or not? What makes much more sense is to say, what are the processes that are going on? What are the tensions that are present? And how are they being handled? And as part of that, how are they being understood by people? So what we had learned in the quality of work-life process, for example, was what they were supposed to be doing was developing respect for all people who worked in that company. What the consultants were totally clueless about was that what respect meant to them was different from what respect meant to most of the union members who thought, gee, now I can say something and people have to listen to me, which in turn was different from what it meant to the members of a union that wasn't participating, who thought they're going to get more power than we are. It was different from what it meant to the managers of the company who said, we have to get this work done. We have to be successful. And what you have to do now is help us get the work done or be successful. In other words, there were multiple understandings present of what was happening. The consultants never realized that. So they just kept acting as if everybody understands things the same way, which they didn't. And it ended up being a disaster. So I think what came about was just learning, gee, the approach many people have taken to studying change is wrong because it doesn't pay attention to all kinds of weird processes that can happen, and in particular, differing understandings. And that understanding the understandings is as crucial as understanding the kind of change that you're trying to carry out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And of course, these divergent understandings, Jean, they can't just be willed out of existence. I mean, this is
well, they can. That's the problem. But the person who wills them out of existence, if they're the change agent, all they're doing is making things worse for themselves.
Jean, when you think about that now, and when you reflect on, not just that early work that you were doing on change, but subsequent significant pieces of scholarship that you've been engaged in within the same arc, if you like. What would you say is the biggest mistake that organizations make when it comes to the business of change making?
Well, I can't answer that one way for everything. But I mean, but well, I will say a few things. One is that there's an often unspoken assumption that change agents are right and people who resist change are wrong. And when change fails, as it does 70% of the time, it's the fault of the people who resist it. And I think that is incredibly short-sighted. I think that doesn't take, there are multiple dimensions that does not take into account. One of which is that the people who are resisting might possibly have a good reason for it. And the good reason might be that they want to contribute to the change, at least if they're resisting for constructive reasons. If they're resisting for destructive reasons, that's different, but those are two very different categories. Another thing that, at least in my experience of studying change, a lot of change agents at the start of a change say, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to be doing all this stuff. And they haven't really thought out much. Number one, how that's going to be heard. And number two, the complexities of implementation. So if somebody says, gee, this is going to be great, we're going to accomplish all this, as soon as somebody else who is interpreting what they're saying in a different way doesn't see that happen, they say the change is a failure because it was supposed to accomplish this and already didn't accomplish it. A second thing I would say, at least as of today, is that there are always going to be mistakes in implementing change. That, by definition, if you're trying to do something brand new, you're going to make error in some way. But that often is treated then as, oh my God, this is terrible. It didn't work the way it was supposed to. But what if we assume in implementing change, there are going to be errors and we're going to learn from it? So again, I can't give an answer of the biggest reason, but I can say that there are multiple processes in the implementation of change that we haven't begun to adequately account for. But the more that's understood and appreciated and treated as normal,
yes,
I think the better off people who try to create change will be.
And clearly not underestimate the complexities that surround the whole initiative.
Right.
Yeah.
And especially the implementation of change.
Yeah,
I don't think I don't think there's anywhere near enough understanding yet, scholarly and or practitioner, of all the complications involved in implementing change.
Yeah, that's certainly a conversation I think that's being picked up a lot more, Jean, in organization studies and in human resource management and so on more generally, that the implementation phase requires a particular kind of line of sight and focus that perhaps is underplayed in the kind of linear thinking maybe that has historically beset us. Jean, another topic which I wanted to mention, because I know it has been quite formative for you, and especially in the special topic forum that you published with Sarah and colleagues in Academy of Management Review, where you were looking at the issue of care and compassion as a particular topic, and the extent to which care and compassion needed to be better understood and perhaps unpacked more within organization studies and through an organization lens. And I, as part of the preparation for this, I reread some of that piece because I was especially interested in the narratives that you portrayed at the start of the piece, where you talk about how, compassion can surprise you, and it can come in various guises, or perhaps not come necessarily the way in which we anticipated, etc. And you tell some very interesting stories at the beginning of that piece about examples of compassion in crisis situations and so on. And my question, Dean, was really about, whether or not we have perhaps neglected that aspect of organization too much. And especially thinking about the times in which we live now and some of the increasing challenge and complexity that organizational life brings people. Do you think there's more to unpack in the conversation around care and compassion?
Sure. I mean, yes, absolutely. And let me just say that that special issue came about in part because it was related to Ann Suey's theme when she was program chair for the Academy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll say that. So it didn't just come out of the blue for us. But, and I would also say that shortly before that time, Peter Frost, who taught at the University of British Columbia, who passed away, had written both about compassion and about toxic handling in organizations. The fact that there has to be toxicity whenever when an organization isn't doing well, and they have to take really drastic steps to do stuff, and that's pretty miserable. So there has to be some very negative events happening for people in an organization. But that his work, that was a kind of combination of how does somebody deal with the necessary toxicity that happens, and also his recognition of the value of compassion, led us to think, gee, this is a very important topic that hasn't been adequately addressed. And so, going back to the earlier question of what are processes that are going on in organizational change, nobody, except in terms of necessary toxicity, which is not even explicitly addressed on, it was when Peter was alive. And nobody's thinking of that as of compassion as a part of organizational change. It is relevant to the extent that you assume, gee, somebody makes an error and that's okay. It's not the end of the world. So how can we care about the person? How can we even care about the organization that's changing enough so that when changes are made that are not perfect, you don't dismiss it all out of hand? So I think it's a very important topic, and I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, just add another part, which has to do with, because we're going to come back to this. How many people think that a necessary part of the research process and of the impact process is compassion? Now, I could come back to that later, but I think those are two other things that we as academics generally do, for which compassion is actually a very pertinent concern, but that I believe is never even thought about at all.
And Jean, and again, because I know this is a thread in your work, is that because of the reflexivity that's demanded, that's required, etc., not being given the place and the space that it probably needs?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're right. And reflexivity that is not a narrow reflexivity, but it's not a narrow reflexivity that focuses only on this specific detail of what I'm doing and how is it going, but a broader reflexivity that is fostering is considering the experiences of different people, what they mean, and again, not just intellectually, but how they feel, and thinking that how people feel, whether they feel like they're being diminished, whether they're being uplifted, those all matter as processes. As processes of as researchers with people participating in our studies. How do people feel? How do we make them feel in the process of our interactions?
In your organization studies piece, Jean, on excellent organization studies, you talk about contemplation and the role of contemplation in the scholar and the scholarly process. Do you see those things as being linked?
I hadn't until you just said it right now. But I guess yes. I mean,
Yeah.
You know, in that piece, the focus was entirely, not entirely, but almost entirely on Mary Oliver's instructions for living a life. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. But I think that as you say it now, and as I reflect on it now, pay attention is actually a gigantically important term. And partly what you could pay attention to is how other people are experiencing our interactions with them that are research interactions.
And that's a contemplative process for sure. Jean, you've also tackled, the question of ethics and crises as part of your work, and what those do to organizations, to the organized, to individuals, etc. And I'm wondering, and it's a kind of a big tent question, but having that body of scholarship produced around aspects of crisis and perhaps scandal and so on, what advice might you offer organizations who are really trying to rebuild trust and integrity in a kind of a post-crisis environment?
Well, I should say, first of all, before I answer that direct question, the United States had a new president inaugurated 2 days ago. And so, and according to this president's approach, ethics is a non-issue now. So you should quit worrying about things like that, because he's going to do a lot of unethical things, and those are just fine. That's a mildly sardonic comment.
Yeah.
But I think I think well, there are levels of ethical violation, and some of them, if companies seem really responsive and they acknowledge that there was the ethical violation, like I'm thinking of Chipotle restaurant, and that I doubt is in Ireland, but they were serving really awful food for a while, and they acknowledged that they were doing it, and they stopped doing it literally always. But people have sort of forgotten about that. A very large organization like the Catholic Church, and that has, well, we're discussing it, has had some scandals in Ireland having to do with orphanages, and scandals in many countries having to do with sexual abuse of children. That I think it's much harder to deal with when it's a multi-organizational, multi-country organization where nobody is on top of all of the issues. I think the best you can do is be honest and do your best to change things. But I think it varies gigantically depending on the size of the thing, how long it keeps going, whether it's a one-time event, like, so I can't give an answer to that.
Sure.
Entirely. I don't think anybody can.
Yeah, indeed. And, as we rightly say, Jean, context matters greatly, of course,
Yeah.
and degrees of complexity depending upon the institutional context and the scale and so on. So, One other big thread, Jean, in your work has been, the whole business, I suppose, of a kind of a more relational, relationship-based scholarship, and the bridging, as I put it, my words perhaps not yours, but the kind of bridging of the academic practice divide, which has historically beset us and been a big part of our conversation. And I'm interested, Jean, to know, how has that shaped your approach to research? Because I have a keen sense that it's obviously, it's highly formative in how it is you engage in the research process, period.
Oh, it definitely is. So I'll tell you a little bit about how that came about. I had done this work with Mike, as I mentioned, in a quality of working life project, and then we had developed a more thought out theory of how change happens. So I got this weird idea. I actually like to test this theory. So among other possibilities, I found a school that was undergoing a fairly major change, and I said, "Can I come study this?" And the person who was principal said, "Yes, yes, yes," and write about it. But then over the course of the year, the change was not successful at all. And she said, "No, don't. Why would you want to write about something that's a failure?" And I realized that I'm an academic doing academic studies. I don't care if it's a failure. The thing that's interesting is the processes. And I started to be aware that she had a really different perception of what it meant to write about something. So about that time, Meryl Lewis, who had written a paper with her then husband, they had been at the Navy postgraduate school, and they'd written about inquiry from the inside and inquiry from the outside and how different it was. And she moved to Boston, and so we started talking. And I started to realize, gee, what would have happened if we put those two together? If in a relationship that, rather than just the outside researcher being the definitive storytelling of what happens in your organization, and you have little say over it, even though it's kept confidential, what happens if we're both contributing to the story that's being told in a way that can be much fairer in the story? And I think that was the starting point of my doing that. I've published many papers now that have to do with academics and practitioners being co-authors and writing together. Most of them I've been the outsider, but not entirely. And that has made me aware of the importance of the relationship. It's also made me aware that that even when I think I'm being really wonderful in developing this relationship, it may not be experienced as such. So David Coughlin, who's there, co-edited a special issue of Jams on academic practitioner things. I don't remember the specifics, but I ended up writing a paper with Jane McKenzie, with whom I had written some academic practitioner things, but this was mostly focused on her experience and in ways I had gotten it or not. Mm-hmm. So I think there's much more to that, but I think that having a relation, being conscious of the relationship between the academic and practitioner is really valuable and important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things I picked up somewhere, Jean, and I can't remember exactly, but it's, I liken it to slow cooking, and how there isn't so much slow cooking goes on anymore, or not as much perhaps. And in some senses, I can see that thread in that kind of work, where building the relationship, understanding the diversity of perspectives that people bring to that relationship, that's absolutely critical to the process, and perhaps to doing justice to the complexities that really surround the process.
I think that's a really good way of putting it, yes.
Yeah. Jean, you've also strongly, if I can put it, weighed in on the business of impact and the impact conversation and where that's all going. You know that it's a big part of the conversation in this part of the world. And I just wanted to give you a moment, Jean, to share a couple of thoughts on where you think this impact agenda is at, and whether or not we might do it a little bit differently into the future.
Okay, I am glad to do this. This is something you all are closer to, because I believe that the major focus started in the UK with the ref starting to emphasize impact, which they defined as something that is the outcome of academic research. So you don't have an impact just by being really helpful to somebody. I mean, you do, but that doesn't count. What has to count is that your academic research leads up to something that's helpful for others, or at least that can get written up in an impact case study. And I believe from talking with you that the Republic of Ireland doesn't do the ref process, but that's right? But
That's
still,
correct.
it's going to affect people. So I think it's a little backwards.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it has taken attention away from the people you're supposedly collaborating with. I think it has taken away from their having an opportunity to express what their concerns are. Like when I have done academic practitioner studies, it's always been on a topic that the practitioners are concerned about. And I collaborate with them to do some kind of academic study that is aimed in part at helping them reflect on what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I know this isn't true of everything, but when I read some of the impact case study reports, when I look at things like the conversation, and become aware of some of the platforms for sharing, a lot of them seem to be much more, I'm an academic, here is this thing I've produced, which is really helpful for all of you, incidentally. And so let me put it here to be helpful to you. But it's not as necessary. I mean, it's in the old garbage can model from the 1970s. It's a solution looking for a problem to which it's the answer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And again, I know they're not all like that, but I get the impression that a fair number of them are. And some of that makes sense. Like there are a lot of, magazine type things that come from multiple different business schools that say, especially the ones that say, here's the awesome research that our faculty is doing, and isn't it great? Look, you can use it. I mean that's fine, and that makes sense. Where I think it stops is in a relationship with somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
where somebody else has the opportunity to have a considerable impact. That's probably the wrong word to use in this context, on what the academic does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so let me just pick up a little on a question you asked me earlier and turn it into here. Does the impact agenda require any compassion? And I've been doing some playing around with Peter Heslin, who's at the University of New South Wales, about what if we turned this stuff on its head and started with what are practitioner initiatives and ways academics can be helpful to them, as opposed, and I mean, and this is not just talking about applied research, this is initiatives that are really important for the university. But I think if we started in that direction, I think compassion might come into impact more. I don't think it's, I maybe I'm missing something, but because you all are in Europe and I'm not, but I don't see anything about the impact agenda even suggesting compassion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, you all can say more about that than I can.
No, but it's an interesting perspective, Jean, and it reminds me of the conversation about, you know, where the most compelling questions come from in the first instance.
Right.
And I mean, we have scarce resources from a research perspective. The more we're addressing, you know, compelling problems, I guess the more we probably don't have to worry so much about impact, because de facto it's
Yeah.
it's built into the question from the very outset. Jean, I'm under pressure time-wise, but there are two other very quick things I'd like to visit, right? One is something which I found particularly interesting, again, more from your leadership perspective in academy, right? And again, I also reread this piece because it meant a lot to me in terms of this conversation, and that was your reflections as academy president back then, and your dream for the academy. Now, I know that there are multiple layers to that piece, and you intend a number of things by it, right? But on reflection, would you say that your, in inverted commas, your dream for the academy has been realized?
So the question Mike is asking has to do with my presidential address, which in turn, and it was given in 2002, so more than 20 years ago now, which in turn was based on a dream I had when Mike Kitt called me to tell me I was nominated to run for the position that would be president of the Academy of Management, and did I want to run? And then I told him I would have a dream about it, and I was based on the dream. So just very briefly, the dream had to do with me shopping for shoes with Deborah at Kona, and in a shoe store that was on top of an apartment building, and next door was a warehouse that was owned by parents of some of my students. And so what I did was I used that dream as I was making sense over the course of the next 3 or 4 years to pay attention to what was going on that I saw that was pertinent to the academy. So pay attention to things like resources, and our resources being used, and what does it mean to be parental in some way, and what does it mean that there's a very earthy thing of shoes on top of an apartment building, which makes no sense at all. And so I have no idea if it's being used, but I think when I went back and read the paper, just because you mentioned it, because I hadn't thought about it in a long time, I think it was saying, number one, some sort of paradoxical perspective is absolutely crucial, which I firmly believe. It was also saying, I think, look at the capabilities we have to, look at what we have to offer. Look at what the possibilities are. And I think that's, in retrospect, that's one way of thinking about how things are going. That academy members and Irish Academy members too, what are the resources we have to offer people that can be very positive? Even in the midst of the year I gave the talk was the year of all the corporate scandals, as well as the Catholic Church scandal in Boston. So, but what do we in the midst of scandalous times or really problematic times, we actually have some things that we know how to do in terms of research and some collaboration with people that we can offer the world. So it ends up being a very positive message about what we have that's available. So I would guess anytime I guess I would say that now, that we are all, everybody on this Zoom call now, especially on the occasions when our internet actually works, we have resources that can be helpful to other people.
Indeed.
And I think that's kind of neat.
And it invokes a more kind of holistic understanding of the place and the space of academia and the academic contributions that people make to you know, some of the real challenges that we face.
Yeah.
Jean, I have one final question, which is really about a sort of a moment of reflection, and I hope you don't mind, right? But if you think about the younger Jean Bartunek and the early career scholar and the starting off and so on, and I'm certain we have early career scholars among us, what, on reflection, in hindsight, with a lot of water under the bridge, what one piece of advice, Jean, would you give to your younger self?
In terms of my program, my doctoral program, which was very traditional experimental social psych at the time, where we took a bunch of research courses, and I hated doing research at that time. I had thought I was going to just be a much better consultant. I would say be grateful for events that extend your capacities to do good work. That's the simplest thing I would say, is that in retrospect, even though as soon as I met Mike Mockett, he taught me some stuff about, on the fly about how to do some qualitative stuff. I just about immediately abandoned any of the kind of work that I'd been trained in. I'm very grateful for the rigor and for the conscientiousness of those courses. So I would say, especially for a doctoral student, if you're learning something, even if it's not what you're going to do later, but you are becoming very expert in a way of thinking, that's absolutely worthwhile. I guess that's the simplest thing I could put it. And I guess I'd also say to the younger Jean Bartunek, this is going to be some adventure ahead of you. And there's no way I can tell you right now what it's going to be, but be open to the adventure, open to the possibilities. So I would certainly not say you better publish all these articles so you get tenure. I would not say that. Although
fantastic, Jean, and enjoy the journey, as they say. And can I just say, Jean, that we are extremely pleased that we can be a tiny part of that journey. I want to sincerely thank you, Jean. You've been a friend to me over many years, and
well, you've been a friend to me too,
and to many people across the academy, internationally, I have to say. And it's a wonderful opportunity for us to acknowledge a tremendous career, a tremendous number of contributions, and a tremendous service career. And this is important because a whole lot of work needs doing in the academy, not just the research itself. So, Jean, on behalf of the Irish Academy of Management, I want to sincerely thank you. I want to thank you on behalf of my colleagues, in particular my colleague Katrina Burke, who can't join us today, but who's responsible for a lot of this and organising it. And I'm going to hand over to Margaret now, who'll wrap things up. Thanks so much, Jean.
And thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank
Mike.
you all.
Thanks,
Mike,
Jean.
thanks for your questions. We're very helpful.
Pleasure, Jean. Thank you.
Thanks. I think so. Unlike most Irish things, this had to finish on time because Jean had a hard finish. She had something on at 3 o'clock. So unfortunately, we didn't have time for questions and answers. But oh, sorry, Jean, you are there. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. You went missing on me. Sorry, Jean. So I don't know. Do we have time for 1 or 2 questions, Jean, or do you have to sign off?
Absolutely.
Super.
Absolutely.
So I am going to just, if you want to put your hand up so I can kind of see if anybody has a particular question that you want to ask. I think we probably have time for maybe 1 or 2. Anybody have any questions? No? Okay. I might just ask a question, Jean, where you were just talking about just a little more about your reflections on impact. So you were kind of saying that sometimes, thinking about what's the most compelling question or problem, that sometimes we kind of often work backwards. So do you have any, I think you kind of spoke around it a little bit in terms of where you see the problems are with regard to the UK ref and their use of case studies. So, I mean, could you just talk a little bit more around your reflections around that in terms of where you see impact?
Sure. It's not so much a problem with the case studies. It's more that the general question that's asked, I think, draws attention to who are we as academics and what do we have to offer. It doesn't draw attention to what's shared among academics and practitioners. I mean, here's one simple example. Andy Van de Ven wrote a wonderful book on engaged scholarship that had to do a lot with how academics and practitioners can each play roles in addressing research issues. Engaged scholar has in many ways gotten translated into dealing with the UN SDGs and similar grand challenges. It's moved away a lot from the academic and the practitioner doing this together. If you look at Andy Hoffman's book, for example, the engaged scholar. So I think, I mean, the issues involved are obviously important, but I think it's interesting that the movement has been away from the relationship, and with the concerns of practitioners taking second place now. Does that make sense?
Just sounds like they're the afterthought in terms of some of the research. So doing research sometimes for research sake, as opposed to really trying to understand the problem, and not engaging properly.
Well,
with
it's more that impact seems to be focused more on the academics doing something without attention to the concerns of the people who are the ones who actually have to address the problems.
Super. Okay, so I know you have to sign off, Jean. So I just want to say
And
huge
I
thanks.
apologize for
No problem.
I
It's the
can't
joys of
apologize
technology.
on behalf of my computer, but I'm annoyed at it. But
It's the
What the
joys
heck?
of working with technology. Thanks so much, Jean. Just again, huge thanks to you for agreeing to speak to us, and hopefully we will have an opportunity to meet in person
Well,
to
I look
give you
forward
the
to it.
award. And hopefully you'll come back to Ireland again. As you say, be open to the adventure is what I'm
Absolutely.
taking away from the talk. Just again,
Absolutely.
thanks to Mike for his work, I know, in terms of preparing for this. Thanks to everybody who attended and listened so attentively. And just in the background, we had Grania, who was helping us organize the event and help us with kind of the logistics of sharing the Zoom and so on. So huge thanks to her as well. As I said, we're really delighted that you agreed to speak and take the award. And you know, it was a huge honor for us to be able to give you the award as well. So thanks again, Jean.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll be in touch soon.
Lots of luck to everybody in the Irish Academy.
Super. Thanks,
in
Jean.
everything you're doing.
Okay. Take care, everyone. Hopefully see you in Minute in August. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Jean.